Hi, my name is Ava, and in this video I'm going to cover Module 2F, which is Biogeochemical Cycles, Energy Flow, and Biological Communities, and I'm going to relate that to chimpanzees. So first off, an ecosystem is all the organisms and the environment in which they live and interact. So this includes biotic, meaning living structures, as well as abiotic, or non-living structures. So for example, in a rainforest ecosystem where chimpanzees live, the biotic structures include, of course, chimpanzees, and trees, beetles, anything that's alive. And the abiotic structures include water, rocks, or anything not alive. So within ecosystems, you have biological communities, which are categorized by species. The species abundance of a community is the number of individuals within each species. So working off that previous example of 500 different species, we might have 30 individual chimpanzees, 15 individual jaguars, and 1,000 individual beetles, and so on and so forth for the rest of the 500 species. From there, we can figure out relative abundance, which is how common or rare the species are in relation to one another. So if we know that we have 30 chimpanzees, 15 jaguars, and 1,000 beetles, the beetles will have the highest relative abundance out of those species, and the jaguars will have the lowest. Finally is diversity, which is the species richness and evenness of species abundance. So essentially, we have 500 species, but if the relative abundance of beetles is so much higher than all the other species, the community isn't very diverse, so we don't have evenness of abundance. I want to mention, by the way, this example is not accurate to the real rainforest communities. Rainforests, including African rainforests, where chimpanzees live, are actually the most biologically diverse biome on Earth. So the next thing to talk about is the four main abiotic biogeochemical cycles. Water, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And these materials just keep on being cycled and recycled throughout the ecosystem. The water cycle includes evapotranspiration, which is the release of water into the atmosphere by evaporation, transpiration, and respiration. And then it condenses and precipitates, where that water comes back down in liquid form and can run off into streams, go into groundwater, etc. Evapotranspiration actually has impact on species richness, as seen in this graph. We can see that as potential evapotranspiration increases, the species richness also greatly increases. And this can be seen in the rainforest environments that chimpanzees live in, which is the most diverse and species-rich ecosystem on the planet. The Congo alone having over 600 tree species and 10,000 animal species. And as we all know, rainforests have a very high level of evapotranspiration because it rains a lot, so there's got to be a lot of release of water vapor into the atmosphere. So next up is the nitrogen cycle, which involves nitrogen circulating through the atmosphere, water, and soils, and this is as a result of waste, fertilizers, and human interference. I'm going to go through the nitrogen cycle with rainforest examples, as the rainforest has one of the most efficient nitrogen cycles with very little leaching out of the environment. So starting off, nitrogen is released as waste into the soils of the rainforest after a chimpanzee poops. From there, decomposers like bacteria, slugs, worms, and fungi break down that waste into ammonia through a process called ammonification. Then that ammonia is converted to nitrites and then to nitrates by bacteria through nitrification. And then from there, those nitrates can either re-enter the food chain by being consumed by terrestrial organisms, or they can be denitrified into gaseous forms to enter the atmosphere. The atmosphere is actually the largest reservoir of nitrogen. So atmospheric nitrogen can then undergo nitrogen fixation by bacteria going back to soils, and then undergoing ammonification, recycling, the whole process. As previously mentioned, this process can also occur as a result of fertilizers and human interference. So fertilizers used in farms have very high levels of nitrogen. So when that runs off into marine environments, this process can also occur by marine bacteria, the whole ammonification, nitrification, denitrification, all that. So yeah. So finally, we'll talk about energy flow. Unlike biogeochemical cycles, energy is never recycled and must always be replenished by the sun. And this is shown in the first law of thermodynamics, which states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, but simply changes forms. And then energy exists in the forms of heat, light, chemical bond energy, and motion. So as energy flows through an ecosystem, it starts from the sun and goes down to primary producers or plants. However, when consumers eat the plant, they get less of that energy because the plant uses energy to grow, and then also a lot of it is lost as heat, according to the second law of thermodynamics, which states that some energy is lost as heat. So for example, when a chimpanzee eats a piece of fruit, only about 10% of the original energy from the sun is actually passed on to the chimp. And then this continues up the trophic levels. That's it for this video on Module 2F, and I hope you enjoyed this recap of the biogeochemical cycles, biological communities, and energy flow in relation to chimpanzees.